All right, so welcome to the APA Style Writing Center workshop. I am Misty Watkins. I am the coordinator for the Writing Center. So if you guys ever contact the Writing Center or you have questions, I'm the person that you're usually talking to. Um, I have a degree in English and a minor in creative writing. I write fiction and creative nonfiction. So that's a little bit about me. And like I said, thank you so much for coming, and let's jump right into it. So today we're going to talk about how APA relates to other citation styles you may have used in the past. We're going to talk about why we cite sources and how we cite sources. We're going to talk about basic formatting requirements of APA and the link between in-text citations and the reference list. We're also going to talk about how to effectively approach and use APA style in a paper, and that is a lot of things to cover. So I will jump right in. All right, what is APA? APA stands for the American Psychological Association. Um, APA style rules were created by the American Psychological Association, and they can be found in an APA manual. The manual provides guidelines for writing as well as proper documentation of sources. The first APA manual was published in 1952, and APA puts out a new manual every couple of years. Right now, we are using the 6th edition. Why do we use APA at Full Sail? A lot of people have used other documentation styles in the past, such as MLA or Chicago. You might have used MLA in like high school English. So why do we use APA at Full Sail instead of something like MLA or Chicago? We use APA style at Full Sail because it's the accepted citation style for business, and it accommodates the wide range of disciplines studied here. Because we have so many different fields in the entertainment business, um, we want to use a citation style that kind of would be acceptable in any of those industries, and APA is really the best one for that. Some things to know about Full Sail and APA is that you'll be required to use this style for every research assignment that requires citation throughout your education here. Every class has at least one assignment that requires library research, so all of your course instructors who ask you to cite your sources will expect you to use APA. And because this is a school-wide approach, it makes sense to learn it early, and it also makes sense to kind of get refreshers. Let's talk about why we cite sources. We cite sources so that our readers are able to distinguish between our ideas and information, and then information taken from outside sources. That means that we as writers get credit for our own ideas, and we give appropriate credit to the ideas of others. When a paper lacks citations, readers assume that all of the ideas belong to the writer. If ideas in the paper belong to an outside source and have not been properly cited, this may be considered plagiarism. When we cite sources, we are also showing that we've taken the time to study and understand the research and documentation process. Utilizing and citing research allows us to support our own ideas and makes our arguments more credible. And any information that comes from an outside source does need to be cited. So like I said, any information that comes from an outside source needs to be cited. This includes quotes, paraphrases, summaries, images, audio, video, game elements, computer software, and other media. So now we're going to talk a little bit about what quotes, summaries, and paraphrases are. So a quote is a word-for-word passage from an outside source. You have to cite all quotes used in a paper, and one of the ways that you do this is you put them in those quotation marks. That's kind of the first step. So what is a paraphrase, and how is that different? A paraphrase is when you take a fact or idea from an outside source and you put it into your own words. Again, you have to cite paraphrases. And then summaries and paraphrases are pretty similar. A lot of people get a little confused about which one is which, but we cite them in the same way. But a summary is when you take the main idea of a piece of writing and you put it into your own words. So this is different from a paraphrase where you put a specific idea or one fact from a piece of writing into your own words. And just like quotes and paraphrases, summaries must be cited. All right, so what about all of those other ones that I listed? Audio, video, media, and images. They also have to be cited. There are two different ways to cite media. One citation style you use when you discuss media in a paper, and another citation style to use when you include the media in a presentation. We're going to talk about that a little bit more later on, so don't worry if you're confused. Okay, if all of these things need to be cited, what does not need to be cited? We don't need to cite common knowledge, but the very next question is always, what is common knowledge? Common knowledge is considered ideas that are available in a variety of sources and are generally accepted facts, such as pollution is bad for the environment or writing is a process. If you can find the same information undocumented in at least 5 credible sources, it's usually safe to assume that it's common knowledge. This is an important distinction and it trips up some students, so pay close attention. It's important to note that if you read an article and remember a fact from that article, that fact is not considered common knowledge. You still have to cite the article. Other things that don't need to be cited include findings from preliminary experimentation, which means experiments you conduct yourself, and original audio, video, and images that you have created. I will say that if you're ever in doubt, cite the idea using APA style. All right, in this next section, we'll get down to kind of the bare bones or the basics of APA style, and we'll talk about some formatting requirements. There are 3 major elements of an APA paper. You have your title page, your in-text citations, and your reference list. There are other elements that are not always needed, like an abstract, but we'll cover that in just a minute. So let's talk about the title page. This is what a title page should look like. And if you give me 1 second, I am going to put a link to a YouTube tutorial that I think is really, really helpful. This shows you how to format and set up your title page. I'm putting it in the chat. You guys can bookmark that later on. But this is what your title page should look like. Again, you have that link that will walk you through the actual formatting of the title page. So let's look at the elements that you need to have on your title page. You need to have a running head or a header. The words running head followed by a colon, and the title of your paper in all caps should appear flush left on the header, and then the page number should appear flush right in the header. You have a different header on your title page than you do on the rest of your document. On the rest of your document pages, you'll drop the words running head and the colon, and it's just the title of the paper in all caps. And then centered about halfway down the page, the title of your paper will appear, and then your name, and then finally the name of the school. The next thing that you'll have in your paper is an abstract. Although I will say not every paper requires an abstract. Abstracts are usually only included with longer research papers such as thesis papers. When required, the abstract is a brief summary of the paper that immediately follows the title page. And it looks like this. The abstract should be double-spaced, and it should include the page header with the title of the paper in all caps flush left and the page number flush right. And the word abstract should be centered. And it should not be bolded or italicized or underlined or put with quotation marks or anything like that. The abstract should be no more than 150 to 250 words. This also may vary based on assignment requirements, but that's a good rule of thumb to go with. And you may include keywords in your abstract. You don't have to, but if you do include keywords, you indent as you would if you were starting a new paragraph. Then you type keywords in italics, and then you have your keywords that follow. Remember, an abstract is not needed for every APA paper. If you have questions about whether your paper requires an abstract or not, always just ask your instructor. All right, the next two important parts of the APA paper are also the parts that students most often have questions on, which are the in-text citation and the reference list. APA style calls for both. You need both in your paper. You can't have one without the other. They kind of go together like milk and cookies. In-text citations are used in the body of the document. An in-text citation specifies which source a particular piece of information, such as a quote, paraphrase, or summary, comes from. And then the reference list appears at the end of the document and gives detailed publication information about each source cited in the document. If we didn't have in-text citations, we wouldn't be able to identify which ideas in a paper came from an outside source and which ideas came from the author. And if we didn't have the reference list, we wouldn't be able to find the references that are used in that paper. In the next few sections, I'll be going through a lot of specific details about formatting for in-text citations and reference lists. Don't feel like you have to memorize everything I say. It's a lot of information, and a little bit later I will show you guys some resources where you can find the same information when you need it. This is kind of a big part about citation styles, is nobody has all these rules memorized. They just know where to find the information, and they know the basics. So again, don't feel like you have to memorize it. Definitely bookmark or write down or have somewhere the sources that I'll share with you later, but we'll definitely get there. David had a question that he put in the chat. Okay, we were told to include the class name and the professor's name. I will double check on this in just a minute. This is a rule that changed not too long ago, and I can't remember which one is correct. I will say that if your instructor is telling you to put the class name and the professor's name, it's always best to just follow your instructor's directions, David. But I'll double check at the end of the presentation just to make sure that I'm giving you guys the right information. Thank you for bringing that up. All right, so now we're going to talk about in-text citations. What should the in-text citation look like? The format changes a little bit depending on whether the information cited is a quotation, summary, or paraphrase. And there are also two basic formats that you can use. So in this first example, it's a quote from a Writing Center blog post, and we've used the author's last name in the sentence after the phrase according to. This is what we call a signal phrase. Hey guys, make sure that you are muting yourselves. So you have the signal phrase, and then you have the author's last name, and then you have the date that the work was published. It's the year that the work was published. That comes immediately after the author's name, and the page number is in parentheses at the end of the sentence. In this example, we don't actually have page numbers because it's from an online blog, So instead of page numbers, we've used a paragraph number. When we put the author's name in the sentence like this, it's called a signal phrase, and this is what it should look like when you're quoting. You'll notice the quotation marks around it, so this is a word-for-word quote. And the second example is another way to create an in-text citation. We don't have a signal phrase. Instead, we put the author's last name, the year, and the page or paragraph number at the very end of the quote. Either format is acceptable. You'll see that in both of the formats, we're including those three pieces of information: author's last name, year of publication, and paragraph or page number. So that's what you need in your in-text citations. Let's look at formatting for citing quotes. In APA style, there are two formats for citing quotes in text. One format is for quotes under 40 words, and another format is for quotes over 40 words. In this example, the quote is under 40 words, so we have quotation marks surrounding the actual quote. We have the author's last name, the year, and the page or paragraph number, and the period appears at the very end of the citation, meaning on the outside of that final parentheses. If the quote is more than 40 words, it should look like this example. We must use a signal phrase. In this case, Chapman 2012 states. We do not need quotation marks, but the quote is indented and it starts on a new line. And this is a strange APA rule. In this format, and only this format, the period appears at the end of the sentence rather than at the end of the citation. And we haven't done it here, but if you omit words, phrases, or sentences within a quote, be sure to use an ellipsis. All right, so we've looked at quotes. Now we're going to talk about paraphrases. In this example, we're citing a paraphrase. We used an idea from the article we're citing, but we didn't use a word-for-word quote. We put the idea into our own words. We still need to include the author's last name as well as the year of publication, but with paraphrases, it's not necessary to cite the page number. It's not necessarily incorrect to include the page number, but it's not required. And you'll also notice, obviously, we did not use quotation marks because it is not a direct quote. For a summary, it's the same idea as a paraphrase. We still need to cite the author's last name and the year of publication, but not the page number. And again, this summary is summarizing the entire blog rather than a specific idea from the blog. Sometimes you're going to find sources that are tricky, and they don't seem to include the information that you need to create an in-text citation. For instance, like the author's name, date, or a page number. So how do we handle these sources? If there is no author listed, we use the first few relevant words in the title of the article or book in place of the author's last name, and the title should be in quotation marks. The other thing that you can do is if the information comes from an organization or a company's website, you can use the organization as the author. For instance, a Food and Drug Administration study might not have an author listed, but you could use the FDA as the author. So you would use the organization or the company's name instead of an author's name, and it would appear at the same place. Sometimes you won't have a date for when it was published, and when that happens, you use the abbreviation ND, which means no date. Again, this is a signal to your instructor. It's a signal to your audience that you know that you're supposed to look for that publication date, but it doesn't exist in this case. If you are quoting from an online source, it's very rare that you'll end up with page numbers. So if that happens and we're citing a quotation, you should cite the paragraph number where we found the quote. So for example, if the quote was in the second paragraph, we would cite para 2. Again, it's unlikely that you will find sources that have already been numbered with their paragraph numbers, so you do that on your own. If we're citing a paraphrase or a summary, again, you don't need the page number, so you don't have to include anything. All right, so let's talk about the reference list now, which is, again, the third major element of an APA paper. We'll start by looking at formatting requirements. Every page needs a header, so the header should look like the rest of the headers in the paper with the exception of the title page. So the title of your paper in all caps is flush left and the page number is flush right. References should be centered at the top of the page. They should not be, again, it shouldn't be in bold or italics or underlined. Sources should be listed alphabetically by author's last name. Again, if you are using the organization as an author, it's still put that in alphabetical order. If an author has more than one work, you organize those by date of publication, and the reference list should be double spaced with no extra spaces between sources. Every line, this is a tricky part, every line after the first line of each entry should be indented. I'm going to, again, provide you guys with a link that shows you how to do that. This is something that I always forget how to do when I'm doing an APA paper, and I have to look it up. But to make that hanging indent work correctly. I see this as a mistake fairly often where the first line will be indented instead of the second line. But this is called a hanging indent, and that this video will walk you through how you do that. Electronic sources should include clickable URLs. And that just makes it a little bit easier for someone who wants to find your sources and read through and kind of see the process that you went through for the research that you did. All right, let's take a closer look at reference list entries. The first step in deciding how to cite a source is to decide what type of source you have. Is your source a book? Is it a magazine, a newspaper article, a journal, a website, a personal interview, a YouTube video, or other type of print or electronic source? APA has really specific rules for citing different kinds of sources. So each entry, regardless of the type of source, will contain the author's name or the creator, if it's known, the title of the work, and publication information. This is where the information starts varying depending on the source type. So it's important to identify the type of source you have and then look for the example of how to cite that particular source. For this example, we're looking at a reference entry for a blog. However, if we were citing a book or an online newspaper or a video game, the citation would have a slightly different format. So we list the author by last name and first initial of the first name. In this example, we have a single author, but your source may have multiple authors, no author, or an organization as an author. The date is in parentheses and it comes after the author. In this case, we're citing a blog, so we need the complete date, including year, month, and day. For some other types of entries, you only need the year. So be sure, again, to check examples for your specific type of source. Notice that only the first letter of the first word in the book or article title is capitalized. Every word that comes after the first words begins with a lowercase letter. Proper names are the exception, and also words that follow a colon, as you can see in this example as well. Again, every line after the first line of the entry is indented. For a blog citation, we have to note whether this is a web blog or a blog comment, and you see that in the brackets. And then for electronic sources, we need that URL, and the words retrieved from are followed by the permalink to the source. All right, so that's the basic reference list entry. What if we don't know the author's name or the date of publication? We're going to look at that together. Let's pretend that we don't know the author for the article that we just listed. So the title of the article moves to the front of the citation. in place of the author's last name. And then we get the date and the weblog and retrieved from, and the URL. Again, whatever is in your in-text citation should be the first thing in your reference list, so it's easy to see where these ideas are coming from and that they're linked. All right, so let's pretend that the article we just referenced has no author listed, but we know that an organization, in this case the Full Sail Writing Center, published the article. So the name of the organization goes in place of the author's last name, and then the rest of the information follows. Again, let's pretend we don't have a date or an author. So just like with the in-text citation, we'd use the abbreviation ND for no date, and it comes after the title spot. All right, so we've talked about how to cite ideas used in a paper, so now let's move on and talk about how to cite media in a paper. For example, let's say you're in a photography class and your instructor asked you to find a photograph online and discuss its composition. We aren't including the image in the paper, we're just referring to it. So how would we cite that? If you're referring to a specific piece of media in your paper, then you need to cite it in APA style using both an in-text citation and your reference list. This is the sample citation for an image. You have the artist's last name and the year for the in-text citation. And then the reference list entry, you do the artist's last name, the first name's first initial, the year, the title of the piece, the format, and then you're retrieved from with the URL. This is true for media like videos, music, computer games, video games, etc. Again, if you refer to them in your paper, you need to cite them. And what if you've actually used a piece of media in a visual presentation? For example, an image or video taken from the internet you wish to use in a PowerPoint or Keynote. If you're reproducing an image in your presentation, you need to follow 3 steps in order to cite it correctly. You have to check the copyright license. Make sure the image is licensed for reuse under Creative Commons. Include an image URL on each slide where the image appears in the presentation. If you actually look on the bottom left hand of this slide, there's a URL. It's really faint. It's a little bit hard to see, but it's like right above the line where the chalk would go on this chalkboard. And then you have to include a reference slide at the end of the presentation. This is the reference slide for this presentation that we have right here. Okay, so how can you find images? There are a few places to look for images that are licensed for reuse. I'm going to actually hop out of here and pull it up. One place that you can go is compfight.com, excuse me. I'll put this link in the chat for you guys. This is nice because they have like a section about photo licenses, where they talk about how to use them, what Creative Commons means, things like that. You can search for photos here, free graphics, frequently asked questions. If you look for a lot of images, or you know that you're going to need images, this is a good place to start. Another great place to go is actually the library. So right now I am on Connect. I just type in library, and what we want are the databases. So Full Sail has actually purchased licenses so that students can use these images. The ones that I would look at first are the AP Image Collection. You can go through here and you can find all kinds of photos, like news photos and things like that. And then the other one that is really great is the Oxford Art Online. Again, if you go, you can kind of scroll through here and find different types of work to explore. So those are both really helpful, and you can find them, like I said, in the research databases for the library. Okay, so at this point, I've thrown a lot of information at you. Um, and I know that APA has a lot of specific rules, and it can seem like a lot to remember. But again, like I said earlier, you don't have to memorize all of all of these rules. You just need to keep some tips in the back of your mind. So let's go through some tips together. Um, the first one is become familiar with the basic elements of an APA paper. That's kind of what we just did, right? We just went through them together. Pay attention to your instructor's requirements. Is APA required for the assignment? How many sources has your instructor asked for? Do you need to include an abstract? Um, Always use a manual as a reference. There are some in the library, or you can refer to an online APA resource. Um, I'm going to show you actually my favorite too. Let's come here. Okay, I love projectapa.info, and I will put this in the chat box as well. This was actually made by a Full Sail instructor, and it covers the sources that you guys use most often. And it breaks it down in a way that makes a lot of sense to me. So it breaks it down into in-text citations, and it takes you through it. Formats for quotations, paraphrases, and summaries, and then works by multiple authors, works with no date, secondary sources, personal communication, all of these things. It really breaks it down. And what it does is it shows you the signal phrase, the signal format, and then the parenthetical format and what it looks like. It gives you an example of how you can plug this information in depending on what type of source you're using or what kind of information you have from your source. And then you can hop over here and you have a reference page, and it does audiovisual media, blogs, websites, and social media, um, electronic books and print books, and newspapers, magazines, and databases. I get a lot of questions in the Writing Center about how to quote or how to cite movies, albums, and online images. So this is a really great resource because, again, it's showing you how to quote these things that can sometimes be kind of hard to find. So like a podcast, um, or a print cartoon. And again, it's showing you examples, and then you would take this information and you would take the information from the one you're trying to quote and plug it in. The other thing that I like about projectapa.info is it has this APA paper format, and it tells you like general guidelines. And then it also shows you um, it's an APA doc template that you can use, you can download, or an APA, you can also download a finished sample paper. So that can be really helpful as well. Both of those can be really helpful. And then the other place that I really like a lot is the Purdue OWL. I give people this link um, all the time. It goes into a lot of information and can be a little bit overwhelming sometimes, but it's a good place to look if you have a very specific question. Another place that I'm going to show you is you can come to the Writing Center and we can help you with your specific questions, or you can come and there are a lot of great information. There's a lot of great information on our Connect page. For instance, APA links, machine, BibMe, EasyBib, all of these great things. I will say I'm seeing you guys chatting about this. As far as templates go, and as far as like citation machine goes, always double check. Sometimes, for whatever reason, the template is just a little bit off, or your instructor has asked for something specific. So it never hurts to pull up, Project APA or the Purdue OWL and just double check that it's actually citing it properly. And then when in doubt about a documentation issue, again, ask your course instructor or make an appointment with the Writing Center. If you guys need more information about the Writing Center, I would say come to the Connect page, hop down here to videos. We have a great archive of the Writing Center Open House, which gives just a lot of information about us, or if you want a much shorter overview, you can scroll down to the bottom and watch this Writing Center resources. It's about 1 minute long, and it does a really good job of just kind of covering everything that we can help you with. All right, so at this point, I'm going to open it up for questions. If you guys have any specific questions, you can unmute yourself, or you can type it into the chat. But thank you so much for coming, and yeah, let me know if I can answer any more questions for you. Oh, David, let me double check on that formatting question that you asked. It looks like that Carrie has listed the link for the survey here, you guys, in the chat. So be sure you click on that. Thank you so much for coming. David, I looked it up. The visual guide, again, I think what we are wanting is the essay title, your name, and the name of the school. You don't need your instructor's name or the class. Again, if your instructor has said that specifically, I would say just double check with them that that's still how they want you to do it. As far as Robert is asking, he has a 2009 MLA and APA documentation style sheet. Is it still valid? Honestly, Robert, I have no idea. I would double check. I would pull up one of these online resources that I gave you guys, and I would just double check that it is that they match.